Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we cover President Trump's new CFTC chairman nomination, an interesting proposal to revalue gold reserves that is newly being reported on, a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill introduced in France, our own U.S. FERC is trying to speed up the connection for data centers, for AI, and clear out the interconnect queue. Bravo. We have AI optimism among young professionals, even amidst all the doom and gloom that we hear from the mainstreamers and doomers, and much more. But before we get into it, just remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. You can follow the pod and make sure you get your alerts every time we put out a new episode on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your pods. Okay, Zach, let's jump right in.
All right. Well, great to be with everybody from chilly Austin, Texas, where it was in the 40s this morning. So we skipped from like summer to winter. It is delightful, but it's great to be back with everybody here on the pod. So first segment we're going to do is, so after the CFTC nomination of Brian Quintenz was withdrawn by President Trump, as Brian mentioned, has finally nominated a new chair for the CFTC, Michael Selig. He's a chief counsel at the SEC, and he's been nominated to chair the CFTC. No, there's a lot of acronyms in there, but there is a lot of buzz. The buzz has been positive. He's been getting praise on X from people like David Sachs and Caroline Pham. So, Brian, what are your thoughts on this nomination? And does this seem like the right first step to sort of get the CFTC fully staffed up for when a market structure law is enacted?
Yeah, to create a market structure for digital assets, we need a staffed CFTC. They're going to be a key part of this process. President Trump has chosen a highly qualified individual in Mike Selig to lead that agency at this critical time for the industry and the country. He worked at the CFTC under then Chairman Chris Giancarlo. He is now chairing a crypto task force at the SEC. So he'll even be well positioned to create better harmony between these two key agencies. So his background makes perfect sense. Glad to see he's getting praise from all the right people. I would say working for Crypto Dad, as they call Chris Giancarlo, I think shows that he has a pretty good pedigree. And now Paul Atkins, as chair of the SEC, has trusted him with leading a lot of the crypto policy initiatives there. This is, if you were to make a candidate for this position in a lab, this is pretty much the background they would have. And his statements on how he wants to help make the US the crypto capital of the world, of course, are very, very encouraging. So harmony between the agencies, his experience at both agencies, people who have been steeped in this space, all praising the choice. This is very optimistic. So the next step, of course, is filling the remaining slots. It's supposed to be a 5-member commission. They only have one, Caroline Pham, currently, who's been holding down the fort and doing yeoman's work. I mean, really getting a lot done as the sole commissioner remaining. Now it's time to fill out the commission. I think she's already expressed a desire to move on from the position. She's been there for a number of years. So we need a new chair, and it would be nice to also have more commissioners. So that's the next step. But this is a very, very bullish sign. You can see the statement from David Sachs. We've seen other supportive statements from around the industry, others who have worked closely with him. He has a lot of allies. Very good sign. Seems like a great choice. Congratulations to Mike Selig.
Yes. And I watched an interview or two with him just as we were preparing for this. And it seems like he's just like the perfect fit, the perfect temperament, for this sort of thing. And so I watched those interviews and I was like, yeah, this is a good choice. Well, another interesting topic that you mentioned at the outset is Yahoo is reporting that Senator Lummis said that the Trump administration is considering converting a portion of the nation's gold reserves into Bitcoin to fund a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And if we were in court right now, we would get laughed out for all this hearsay. After reading the article, it doesn't sound like it's a terribly concrete plan right now, but this is not the first time that revaluing the gold standard has been discussed. We've talked about it before on the podcast. Senator Lummis has talked about it before, but Brian, can you tell us a little bit more about both of these ideas? The idea of revaluing the gold sort of revaluing gold on its own, and then the idea of possibly converting some of those gold reserves into Bitcoin reserves.
Yes. So let me start with this. America has too much debt. Shocker, right? To everyone. We have to grow our assets quickly to help outrun the debt side of the balance sheet. You see that with some of the investments the Trump administration has announced. With our gold reserves, it is valued at about $42 an ounce. That is the price it was, I believe, in the 70s, the last time it was revalued. It's actually worth $4,000 an ounce. So we could strengthen our national balance sheet by simply marking our assets to the market. And if we diversify our reserves and acquire some Bitcoin, that would really fire the starter's pistol and begin to realize the self-fulfilling prophecy of Bitcoin. The country, the United States, could diversify its reserves by acquiring Bitcoin, which would lead other nations and companies and individuals to do the same. And since the supply is capped, that means the value will increase. This could be one piece of a puzzle that leads us towards financial health. Not the only piece, but it could be an important piece. The criticisms of this have been essentially that you're, in a way, printing like $1 trillion because unleashing this actual value of the gold, people do get worried about that. And then the government could binge spend on that, I suppose. But I will say this is an idea that I think Senator Lummis's office has been championing for a while, and I think it should be a part of the conversation. I think it could be very good for as the U.S. tries to get out of its debt spiral where we're spending more on debt service than we're taking in revenues. Again, you can't really tax your way out of this debt spiral. You have to grow your way out. That means GDP growth, which means more tax revenue. That also means growing assets for the government. And that's, I think, why the president has been talking about sovereign wealth funds and taking stakes in various critical companies. I would emphasize not control of companies, just trying to have the taxpayer. If the government's going to be providing support for key critical companies, then the taxpayers should get some reward for that. I actually think that makes some sense, and it could help us grow out of this problem. A key in execution here is going to be to avoid excess volatility, because one of the other criticisms, in addition to this sort of pseudo money printing criticism, is if you're moving from a relatively stable store of value asset in gold into a more volatile asset like Bitcoin, fair enough. There's a way to do that, though, that I think will make things more predictable and allow more people to stomach this idea. And that is, you have to do it by taking a cue from the Bitcoin network, and you have to do things gradually and with transparency. So it should be over a period of time with some limited amounts over time. Now, you don't want to cause supply or demand shocks with like massive government purchases or massive government sales all at the same time. And so I think Lummis's bill actually does that. It schedules it out over a number of years. And again, one of the greatest benefits of the Bitcoin network is its transparency. People can actually audit the network whenever they want, and they can see how this policy is being implemented if it were to be implemented. Now, in terms of gold, you talked about, or I have your notes to me, 261 million troy ounces of gold, which is 18 million pounds of gold, 9,000 tons of gold. Seems like a lot of gold. And I guess it's all in Fort Knox. That's what they tell us. But again, they value this at $42 an ounce. It's actually worth $4,000 an ounce. And I guess it's roughly, according to Senator Lummis at least, it's like 5% of the world's gold, something like that. And I think her proposal is to make it so that the United States works its way up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of the Bitcoin available, just to kind of, as Secretary Bessent says, move us into the 21st century in terms of our reserve assets. So it's interesting. One of the debates on the policy side that I've also heard, so the money printing criticism, the volatility criticism, I've also heard that if you unleash this amount of capital, all sorts of members of Congress are going to come out of the woodwork and demand their pound of flesh for whatever their pet project is. If managed properly, hopefully we could avoid that. This is really supposed to be debt management for the country / monetary policy and strengthening the value of the dollar, stop it from inflating away all the time. I think from a Republican perspective, it's like, all right, let's spend it on financially healthy things or make us stronger militarily. The Democrat side, who knows? They'll probably want to pour more into the social safety net, I suppose. But I think it would be important to limit the scope of this to strengthening the financial health of the United States, because after all, that would be the entire point of this. And Senator Lummis's prediction is that over 20 years with a Bitcoin reserve, you could end up having the national debt. I think that's based on various models, including some from Michael Saylor. So anyway, very interesting idea. Glad to see the conversation is renewed. The Treasury Secretary has said they don't have any interest in revaluing the gold at this time. Perhaps he's softening on this. Perhaps this is just rumor and innuendo. We don't really know, but always an enjoyable thought experiment, nevertheless. What do you think?
It is a very interesting story. And the one thing that made me smile about that last point you said is one of the things that, that about the current administration is, for all the great reasons I'm sure that the secretary has for saying we're not considering that right now, there's one person in the administration that you have to convince that something is a great idea and he'll run with it, and that's the president. So we'll see what we go there. I think, the idea that we're $38 trillion, like people don't even realize they don't even know what that means. It's not even real, but at some point it is going to be real and there will be some sort of reckoning, and any measure to reduce the debt or the deficit is smart. An idea that you could cut that in half is incredible. If people realized, one of the points you made, how much we spend just on servicing the debt, it would make them throw up. It should. And if you were to take those numbers and apply it to one's own household budget, you realize how real this gets. So that we're having these kinds of conversations that, again, 5 years ago would have seemed kooky, are becoming more mainstream because they're legitimate policy ideas. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good policy idea. We have to figure that out. But that it is being considered, and that is very encouraging. And I think it shows the point we're going to transition to, the importance of establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There are geopolitical implications for that, because another story that you mentioned at the outset is that France is introducing a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. And the goal is to acquire 2% of the Bitcoin supply, which is about 420,000 Bitcoin, over the course of 7 or 8 years. So very interesting story. Jumping over to the other side of the pond, Brian, what can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, even France might bend the knee to Bitcoin. It's a long shot right now, but the bill could be a canary in the coal mine, particularly if the U.S. really starts to build a robust strategic Bitcoin reserve. Other G7, G20 countries will be forced to do the same, because, like the old axiom from Satoshi, you might want to get some Bitcoin just in case it catches on. Well, if it catches on at the nation state level, every major country is going to have to follow suit or be left behind. So this is uncharacteristic for France, I think. Europe has been generally pretty hostile to technology. You look at their posture towards AI, look at, their obsession with climate change with respect to Bitcoin, that they don't want anybody to use electricity that they don't approve of because of climate change. I mean, they've not been a very hospitable jurisdiction compared to the United States, to say the least. There was, in July of this year, some French lawmakers considered a proposal to convert excess energy supply into monetary value through Bitcoin mining. Great idea. That's literally what Bitcoin miners do all the time, because they do have an excess energy problem, because they actually have been ahead of the curve on nuclear power. So that was enlightening, to say the least, that they actually were entertaining that idea. Now you have this bill introduced to fund a strategic Bitcoin reserve, like the U.S., with seized assets through criminal actions, and it would create a stablecoin framework, this proposal in France, and would oppose a CBDC. Seems a lot like what the U.S. Congress has been working on. to be perfectly honest. This has been reported on by Bitcoin Magazine, our friends at Bitcoin Magazine. They do a great job. And they've noted that this is not likely to be enacted into law anytime soon. It was a center-right party that holds very few seats in the legislature. So it's not like this was from leadership or anything else. But nevertheless, a lot of times bills need to be introduced and reintroduced, and conditions need to sort of catch up for something to pass. So I think this is a good step. And following our previous discussion of the U.S. government, and they've announced they are looking at ways to acquire Bitcoin to stack sats in a national strategic Bitcoin reserve. You're seeing other countries think, all right, well, if the U.S. does this, what should we do? And so far, this is what I think we have in terms of proposals in France. Not a bad way to approach it. And like I said, some of the elements of this bill echo what the U.S. Congress has been doing to try to make the U.S. the Bitcoin superpower of the planet. So interesting. Very good that bill has been introduced. Probably not passing anytime soon unless the U.S. forces their hand, in which case maybe this bill actually does move up the ladder of priorities. Interesting development. Again, sort of a thought exercise like the last story, but these things are until they aren't, until they're real, right? And life comes at you fast. So we'll see what happens in the coming months or years.
And if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then what the Congress is doing is very good, because they literally took all three of those major elements and put them all in one bill. So that's also encouraging. Very exciting. Well, we're going to keep on rolling with some more interesting news. This is great news out of the Department of Energy. Secretary Chris Wright has directed FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to initiate rulemaking to rapidly accelerate the interconnection of large loads, including data centers, positioning the U.S. to lead in AI innovation and the revitalization of domestic manufacturing. Brian, this is big news. What are some of your takeaways from this directive?
So speeding up the process for interconnecting large loads, critically important. There are places in the country where it's a 7-year wait time to get an interconnection for a data center. Unacceptable. So speeding up the process, great. We need to do that. Part of that is clearing out the interconnect queue, basically the line you wait in to get your power, to eliminate speculative projects. And right now, there are a lot of companies will dabble in different markets and try to figure out where the power is going to come from while they kind of build out the rest of their plans. We can't have that. We have to have real, I hate this metaphor, but shovel-ready jobs in the queue getting connected as fast as possible. So clearing out the queue, great step. There are nuances to this that will come out, I think, in the notice and comment period. But overall, the signal here is that the administration is listening to the market and acting quickly to help American companies win. That is unabashedly positive. As I said, there will be some nuances and how this is implemented and, maybe some stumbling blocks, but they're trying to move quickly, resolve those issues quickly, and get to a place where companies can interconnect quickly. That is absolutely necessary. They've listened to the market, they've listened to the industry, and they're taking quick action. So glad to see that. It shows the president and his administration really are listening. I mean, these are issues that we've talked about, other companies have talked about. They solicited feedback. They are soliciting more feedback, and they're trying to move quick. They're trying to get all this rulemaking done in 6 months by April. That is very optimistic for government, I will say. Not impossible, but it is optimistic. I would say one idea in here is that they want to prioritize flexible loads. If you can reduce your demand during peak times so that we're not stressing the grid when people need air conditioning or heat in the winter, then you should get priority. I actually agree with that idea. There's some nuance here. Like in Texas, we're very familiar with ancillary services and demand response. You can sell power into the wholesale market. You can participate in a program where ERCOT controls your loads and treats you like a dimmer switch. Those, I think, have been very helpful. It compensates companies when they forego revenue in exchange for grid stability. I think it's sort of a fair deal. One concern is they talk about dispatch in this rule, and that could be a little more complicated because if you have frequency issues or other things where they just kind of give regulators like a shutoff valve where you can turn off businesses, That's going to be very problematic. A lot of AI companies are going to hate that. I don't think we would like that, right? I think that could be problematic. So I think ironing out that wrinkle of what do you mean by the dispatchable piece of this, or the dispatch component when you're talking about frequency or other issues, versus the ancillary component where you're actually having business relationships between the grid and companies to get to the best outcome for ratepayers. I think we like that piece of it. I think that makes more sense, letting market forces decide rather than a command and control side generally. But we're still learning. What exactly do they mean by that? What a NERC, a lot of people don't know what NERC is. So FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, private entity, but they set standards for grid reliability. What are their standards going to look like? Their standards have been a problem so far for flexible loads because they don't really grade you on that curve. Like they just think if you're interconnecting a load, you're using power, that means we're getting closer to peak demand. Not if you're a flexible load. So getting them to actually recognize that in their standards will be important. But again, what do you do with it? Once you recognize it, what do you do with it? Are you going to have more of these market forces working together to make sure that we are not running up against peak demand all the time? Or are you going to have a top-down kind of command and control, like shut-off valve? And these are things that need to be worked out in the process. But I'll go back to the beginning when I say recognizing flexibility, very good. Cleaning out the interconnect queue, necessary, very good. Speeding up the review process to get companies connected really needs to happen. I mean, it just does for the market. So we're not operating in FERC jurisdictions yet. I mean, if we acquire new sites someday or what have you, maybe these will be more important. But the NERC standards that come out of this are going to affect everybody because even in the ERCOT market, they use NERC standards. So we will pay close attention to this. We'll learn more as the process continues. Bullish signal, but not without some, I don't know, speed bumps that we're going to have to work out over the course of the process. We'll see. The next 6 months will be busy on this issue. But good on the Energy Department for taking action, seeking input, and we'll get to a better place, I think, very soon.
Yeah, and to sort of lift the veil, for the audience, there's as much as there's, I think it was President Obama that talked about like he could, use his pen and his phone to lead if Congress doesn't want to act or whatever. The reality is there's a law, the Administrative Procedures Act, and these big ticket policy changes like what they're talking about right now have to go through a notice and comment period. So this isn't just some pro forma thing. Hey, we got this great idea. Tell us some stuff. Like there are statutory requirements as you go through this rulemaking process. And that's the importance of this is like that quote, that pull quote that I read from Secretary Wright, like I could not have written that better myself. That's the aim. How do we get there? What is in those four corners of the paper? And all those 3 or 4, 5, 6 things that you said that are great. And there's that one area that, hey, there's a little nuance, there's a little subtlety that we have to, like, that is the purpose of the notice and comment period. And one of the great things about this administration is I mean, like we joke about it, but it's like been RFI season for us. Like all we've been doing for the past few months is responding to requests for information from agencies about various things. The point of it being the government, whether it's at the state level or at the federal, we want to advance a really good policy. Is this the right policy? Is this the right direction? Or is there anything we need to know? And they have been, I think, incredibly responsive. Doesn't mean they do everything we want all the time, but they've been incredibly responsive. So this is just another example of a great policy idea that's going to work its way through the process, as you said, with an ambitious timeline, but something that we as a company and that some of our contemporaries in this space need to certainly engage on.
And it's a welcome change in posture. I will say, we've said many times, the last administration seemed like they just wanted to put us out of business. The like rulemaking process and the RFI processes, you knew going into it that they already had the conclusion that they want to reach. And they were just going through the process because they were required. And they would read the comments, but then they would throw them in the garbage and do what they wanted to do anyway. It seems like the Trump administration is legitimately seeking feedback because they want to win. and they want American companies to win. And so it is the government coming at us with a very open mind, I think, is an interesting thing, because politics is funny. Usually throughout a campaign, positions kind of solidify, and then they come in and they say, all right, we're going to do this. Boom, here's this. You put your comment saying that's a bad idea, and here's why. They say, well, we're doing it anyway. Trump administration is actually saying, like, what do you want us to do? And what's the best way to do it? And it's refreshing. It's not normal in DC to have this posture, but it's very refreshing.
It is. I feel like a lot of times I find myself saying, I want to, let's not do it fast. Let's do it right. And there's a time for doing things fast, but there's also a time, there's an appropriateness of being measured and doing things right. And so sometimes when we say, we wish Congress would move faster on this, or the administration would move faster on that, yes, there are a lot of things that we do, and at the same time, like we're seeing a lot of good things, come out of this. So as long as things keep going and get done, we'd like them to be done by the end of the year, or before the next election. But a lot of optimism. We're just going to keep rolling with the optimism here, because in our next segment, there was a very interesting study from American University in Washington, D.C. I studied there for a semester when I was in college, rather than studying abroad. Well, I did study abroad in the foreign country of Washington, D.C.
That's right.
But but a very interesting
your Texas
study.
Passport to get here.
Yes, I know. I needed my passport to get in. But anyways, an interesting study from American University in Washington, D.C. that Axios reported on. It found that young adults who use AI more regularly are more optimistic about their career potential. It makes sense, but there are some nuances in there. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about the study and kind of what are your takeaways from it?
If you use AI on a day-to-day basis to make yourself more efficient, to produce more than you used to faster, you are going to remain a valuable employee. You will get promotions, you will be a leader, you will get ahead. If you do not, you are at risk of falling behind. I think it's that simple. And there's a lot of fear and trepidation about AI. It's like anything in life. If we don't really know it, or we don't really understand it, we don't see the benefits, then drift away from it. But when you learn more, you try it more often, you immerse yourself in it. It is a skill, by the way, like using AI productively. It's a new skill that I think everybody should start to learn very quickly. Your fear will go away and you build a respect for it. It's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything. You still have to check sources. You still have to edit things. You still have to use human critical thinking and intuition to come up with the right prompts and to come up with the right follow-ups. And then, like I said, checking things, editing things, iterating. It's not perfect, but it really does speed things up. It makes people complete tasks much faster and then shift their skills to higher and better uses a lot faster. So there's other technologies. We talked about Dave Freeberg on All In last week, talking about when cars came into fashion, the Model T came out, a lot of horse and buggy drivers were put out of work. But guess what they could then do? They could become taxi drivers, or we built the interstate highway system. Like, there's car factories popping up everywhere. Like, there'll be other opportunities. Humans will shift their skills to higher and better uses if they're accomplishing more simple things faster. I've said this, I told this to my nephew recently. I was like, you should use AI every day, get used to it, get it to help you answer questions faster, help you do research faster. It's not perfect. You have to check it, but you should build your skills like this, because if you are a more productive employee, you're going to get ahead in your career. If you are stuck in the past, you will fall behind. So glad to see that the more people use it, the more they get comfortable with it, and the more optimistic they are about their careers. That tracks, in my opinion, and from my experience with it. It will do cool things. Like I said, it's not a panacea, but it will help people do task management, calendar management. You can automate very simple, repetitive tasks. We have it here, right? It helps us with like our expense management. It makes that go faster. Editing, writing reports, creating drafts of things. It really does take layers of work out of stuff so that you can accomplish things faster. Now, in terms of like the bigger ticket items of curing cancer, finding medical treatments, where we're going to have drone on drone versus human on human. Like, there are some really big ideas here that I think are going to come out of AI, but even your everyday employee can use it to be better, more effective, more efficient, create more value. And as I've said many times in the past, that creates more GDP per capita and a higher quality of life for people in general when you zoom out. So glad to see that the more people learn about it, especially young people, because they have experienced a lot of job displacement recently, that the better they get at it, the more optimistic they are about their careers. That's exactly the right way to think about this. So glad to see that data. Interesting that came out of American University. Good for them for doing the study. I think it's an interesting study and a good question to ask. And filled me with optimism for once, rather than listening to all the doomers who like to talk about AI.
It was a very, very, very encouraging story. And it's like any technology, you have to just use it and learn how to use it responsibly, well, and it will be another very big tool in your toolbox that'll make you more productive, more valuable to your company. So very encouraging story. All right, we're going to transition over to our final two fun segments of the week. Our next segment is a segment called What's the Headline? I provide the context of an actual news story, and then we will each supply a made-up headline. So story number one, President Trump had a wild tour of Asia. He first visited Malaysia to broker peace deals, work on trade deals, and secure critical mineral access. He also visited Japan, where he landed on a U.S. military aircraft carrier while the Top Gun song was blaring on loudspeakers. He did his signature YMCA dance for some 6,000 troops. Just only President Trump can do these things. So, but that joke aside, President Trump, he is delivering results and he's having a little bit of fun along the way on his trip to Asia. Brian, what is the headline?
Yeah, and I love the picture you chose for the story. So my headline is, as part of Secretary Hegseth's No Fatties campaign in the military, Trump's YMCA dance is incorporated into PT requirements every morning for the troops. They're doing the Trump dance. I love it. He also announced some good progress on the China trade deal. Very good stuff. Lowering tariffs, more soybean purchases by China, potentially some chip sales from the video. We'll see. Anyway, yeah, good stuff. No Fatties campaign. YMCA dance. Going to keep them all skinny.
I'll never get over that, listening to Secretary Hegseth talking about, like, we're not going to have fat generals walking around the Pentagon anymore. And I just think of that. It just makes me smile. So for my headline, I said, Trump dances to the YMCA in Japan, but saves the Macarena dance moves for Russia-Ukraine peace deal.
I love it.
My son loves the Macarena. All right. Story number two, we're going to dump on France again. So straight out of an Ocean's 11 storyline, 4 masked thieves used an extendable ladder and some simple power tools that you can buy at whatever France's version of Home Depot is to break into the second story through a second story window at the Louvre Museum in Paris. So in just 7 minutes in broad daylight, they scaled the ladder, smashed 2 display cases, stole 8 pieces of jewelry that belonged to Napoleon and his wife, and they were valued at over $102 million. It wasn't until 3 minutes after they broke in that an alarm went off, and 1 minute later, they were scooting away on tiny French mopeds that were waiting for them below. 2 suspects have since been arrested, but at least the time that I researched this, 2 of them were still on the loose. So, Brian, thieves break into the Louvre in broad daylight. They make off with Napoleon's jewels. What's the headline?
As Christmas approaches and husbands hunt for jewelry, the extendable ladder stocks surge because my wife, I think, like many wives, does not have cheap taste as I look for nice things to buy her. I didn't know this was an option to just get a big ladder and steal some $102 million worth of jewelry. Very innovative approach to Christmas shopping, I think, for these thieves. Wild. I can't believe they pulled this off. But speeding away on mopeds is like the most European way to do it I've ever seen.
Yes. It's great. I always, always watch that, like in Formula One races, a driver will, crash out, or his car will have some kind of system failure, and they get off the track and they go behind the barrier, and there's always like some European moped that like would not even fit one American, but somehow they're trying to fit two people on this thing and scoot away. It is fantastic. For my headline, I said, wimpy French cops bring a show of force. They wave baguettes and use olive oil spray to take down Louvre heist suspects.
It probably did. It's probably true. Probably true. I'm impressed that they found them.
It is. And it took them 8 days. We threw up a picture here of some cops standing outside that sort of the pyramid. And I'll have to try to zoom in and see if they're actually carrying any weapons. All right. For our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And I am just going to go back to the World Series again, but it has been a very exciting series. So the Dodgers, and when we talked about this last week, I didn't think the Blue Jays had a chance. I thought the Dodgers were just going to clean up. But so they split the first 2 games in Toronto. Then they went to LA for 3 games. The Blue Jays and the Dodgers in game 3 played an 18-inning game. It was like well over 6 hours, almost 7 hours. The Dodgers won 6-5 on a walk-off home run from first baseman Freddie Freeman. And amazingly, the Dodgers also won game 3 of the World Series in 2018 on a walk-off home run. So in game 3, which was the first of, again, 3 games in a row, both teams used up their entire bullpens. They had guys in the bullpens that like would normally pitch like an inning at most, trying to pitch like 3 or 4 innings. So they used up their entire bullpens, made games 4 and 5 that much more difficult to navigate. But perhaps more amazing than any of that is Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani broke a playoff record. So no one has ever reached base more than 6 times in a playoff game. They've been playing baseball since like the 1800s. No one has reached more than 6 times in a playoff game. He reached base 9 times. He had 2 home runs, 2 doubles, and 5 walks. 4 of them were intentional walks. The Blue Jays managers gave up. There's like, we are not pitching to him. So they walked him 4 times. I think it was like in the 18th inning, he got walked, but they didn't do it intentionally because like someone else was on base or something like that, but 9 times. So, Dodgers win game 3, but after all that, they came back and they played again Tuesday and Wednesday night, 3 games in a row. The Blue Jays dominated late in both games. They won both games. They're ahead 3-2. The series goes back to Toronto. And so to win the World Series, Toronto has to win 1 game at home. To win the World Series, the Dodgers have to win both games in Toronto. So it's been a very exciting series.
It has been an exciting series, and I really don't like either team. Sorry to our Canadian friends who work at Riot who've been parading around in Blue Jays jerseys all week. I'm a Yankee fan. I don't love either team. I was kind of rooting for the sweet meteor of death to end this World Series, but it's been fun to watch. It's been great baseball, very exciting. So my grab bag item, this pod is coming out on Halloween, and given that we work with a bunch of electrical engineers, this tweet warmed my heart from the Twitter handle, X handle, Massimo. Never tell your electrical engineer parent you want to be a transformer for Halloween. This parent dressed his daughter up as a transformer, not the movie Transformer, but an actual electrical transformer, which made me laugh and warmed my heart. All right, I think we have exhausted our material for this week. There will always be more next time, but thanks for joining us for this episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Remember to follow me on X at MorgansternNJ, like and subscribe. Follow us on this pod, the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod, on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your pods, and we'll see you next time, again, on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.